Today we're going to do a video for a fellow flight instructor that is suddenly finding themselves having to use non-directional beacons. And of course, flight training in the lower 48 states, they haven't seen them. So we're going to go over some basic use for simple VFR navigation with the non-directional beacon. Couple of terms to know. We have what I've already mentioned, the non-directional beacon. The non-directional beacon is just a radio station that sets out a signal. Then we have ADF, or Automatic Direction Finder. The Automatic Direction Finder is the needle in the airplane when tuned to the non-directional beacon, points at the radio station. It's a very simple and what I like to call dumb instrument. It just points, it just says, hey, I'm over here. And it just points right at the station, absolutely nothing to set. But a couple of terms to know to make it usable. First, we have a magnetic heading, and that's simply the direction the airplane is pointing. We have relative bearing, and the relative bearing to the station is going to be counted from the magnetic heading. Then we have magnetic bearing to the station, which is going to be the magnetic heading plus the relative bearing, and that will equal the magnetic bearing to the station. So if I know my magnetic heading, my relative bearing, or the magnetic bearing to the station, I can figure out mathematically the one figure that I don't have. And the way when we had to know this for written tests and using it, the way we remembered it was my hairy red butt equals my butt 2. So magnetic heading plus relative bearing equals the magnetic bearing to the station. So the example I have here is the airplane is flying a magnetic heading of 030. The station is 090 from the airplane. So the relative bearing is that difference of 60 degrees. So let's say we are flying in the area of Gulkana, and we want to use the Glen Allen NDB to navigate by. First thing we will do is we will tune the frequency of 248 into our ADF and identify it just like we would a VOR. We'll turn the volume up, we'll put it into our over the speaker or into our headphones, and we will listen for the Morse code identifier. So let's say that we are someplace to the west and maybe slightly north of the station, and we want to use the Glen Allen NDB to help us get to the Gulkana Airport. So the first thing I want to do is fly to the NDB. So let's say that we have tuned and identified, and we get a setup in the cockpit such as this. We're flying a 090 heading on the magnetic compass. So of course that's the magnetic heading of our airplane. And the display we get on the ADF needle points to 030. Now, I know it's set up as a compass, But don't think of that N as north. Think of that N as nose of the airplane. So right now, that pointer is saying that the station is 30 degrees off of the nose of our airplane. So if we use our formula of a 030 magnetic heading, a 090 magnetic heading, plus a 030 relative bearing will give me a magnetic bearing to the station of 120. So if I then turn the airplane to a heading of 120, I will get the following indication. The ADF needle will be pointing at the N because the station is straight ahead of us, and our compass will read 120 because that is the magnetic heading we are flying. We're not flying a heading of 120 to fly that magnetic bearing to the station of 120 degrees. So, what's going to happen when we cross the NDB? Well, the needle's going to flip around and now be pointing behind us or to the S. We would still be flying that 120, but now the needle's pointing behind us. Well, now we want to use the NDB to help us get to the airport. So, couple of things we could do. We could measure it on the sectional chart, or we can go to our chart supplement, which tells us that the airport is a 153 bearing from the NDB and 2.5 miles. So, if we fly a heading of 153 as we cross the NDB, what will happen is we will end up on a heading of 153 with the arrow pointing to south behind us. And if we fly that for 2.5 miles, we should be directly on top of the airport. Now, let's say we want to navigate with the NDB, and we want to join the airway that leaves northeast of the station. Well, first off, we need to know the heading. Couple of ways that we can figure that. The easiest way would be to look at an IFR chart that has that same airway and just take it straight off of the IFR chart. Or we can remember that our navigation aids are always set magnetic. To find out what the variation was when it was set, we look at the chart supplement, and it tells us that this is set 19 degrees to the east. So we could actually use a plotter, figure that course in relative to true north, and then adjust it to magnetic by subtracting 19. So I went easy way and saw that it is a 213 heading into the station. We want to navigate away from the station, so that would be the reciprocal of 033 or 33 degrees. So let's say, first off, we have to decide. We took off from the airport. We ended up a little bit to the east of the airport. And now we're flying kind of north and actually northeast on the compass because of the magnetic variation. We're flying kind of to the north to head towards that track outbound. The first thing we have to do is decide on an intercept angle. So for this, I'm going to use an approximate 45-degree intercept angle. So a 45-degree intercept angle off of 033, we'll make it easy and just call it 030, would be a heading of 345. So we're flying the airplane 3, 4, 5. Now and this is what that would look like if we were just east of the airport. The compass would be reading 345, but the needle would be pointing to the west because the station is to our west. As we approach the course we want to fly, what indication are we going to see? We are going to see that intercept angle on our ADF. So what we should see is when the needle, the tail of the needle, because we're flying away from this now, the tail of the needle is pointing to 045. That would place our airplane roughly on our desired course. So what we would need to do is lead a turn off to 033, and what will end up happening is the station will be behind us. We'll be flying 033 on the compass, and the needle should point directly behind us. Now, if we were trying to fly inbound on a course, we would do the opposite. The head or the pointer of the needle would be pointing to our intercept angle, and then we would lead that turn off, and then the arrow would be pointing back to the N. Keep in mind, all these examples are no wind. If we have wind drift, they are not going to point straight at the north or the south. There'll be a little bit of wind correction. So that's the simple stuff we can do to help ourselves navigate with a non-directional beacon.